Okay. Welcome everyone to the California Water Data Consortium's March 2026 Data for Lunch, using AI to track SGMA implementation across California with Ryo Takanashi from WaterOne.ai. I'm Elisa Solonis-Centric, the Senior Communications and Outreach Manager at the consortium, and I'll be introducing our speaker and supporting today's discussions. We're also joined by our Associate Program Director of Applied Solutions, Hannah Ake, and she'll be there to help facilitate and moderate today's discussions and Q&A. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Yes, obviously this meeting is being recorded and it will be sent out via email. So if you're here today, you will get that email, and it'll be posted to our website and our YouTube channel, usually within about a week, sometimes earlier. And then questions are obviously welcome throughout the presentation. Please add them to the chat box in Zoom. I've kind of limited everyone's ability to unmute for now, but once we get to the Q&A section, you're welcome to like raise your hand and you'll be able to unmute and like talk directly with Ryo and Hannah. But just wanted to kind of keep that closed during the presentation to avoid interruptions. And then there is a survey at the end of the event, so please complete that. It'll come up when you close out your Zoom window or whenever you leave. That just helps us plan for future Data for Lunch events and offerings. And if you have any ideas for topics you want to see, we'd love to hear it. And then this is today's agenda. Ryo's presentation will be about 30 minutes or so. And then we have the facilitated discussion with Hannah and Ryo, where Hannah's prepared a couple of questions ahead of time. And then additionally, Ryo has graciously agreed to stay on Zoom for an informal Q&A discussion at about 1 o'clock. So again, feel free to pop those questions into the Zoom chat throughout today's events. And if you're having any technical difficulties, feel free to just DM me directly. So for those less familiar with the consortium, we are an independent nonprofit created through a partnership between state agencies and non-state entities. Our mission is to catalyze innovative water management through advancement and use of open data, especially in the face of climate change. And what that looks like is we basically bring people together and institutions to share ideas, synthesize information, design smarter ways to use and share data. And our work spans across kind of these 4 different spaces. So from research to tool development, hosting webinars and panels and other types of events, shaping policy recommendations, and essentially helping our community come together around a shared vision for open data and climate resilience. So my colleague Avery is going to drop a couple links into the chat where you can learn more about what we do. And of course, you all are here today because you know about our Data for Lunch series. It's just one of the ways that we fulfill our mission. If this is your first time attending, please let us know. You can drop that into the chat too. Welcome. And if you'd like to learn more about Data for Lunch, Avery will also drop that link into the chat. And then I'd also like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, the California Department of Water Resources, Stantec, Environmental Science Associates, and Olson for making this series possible. If you or your organization are interested in, getting your name up on here or sponsoring future events, please reach out to me directly. And we have a sponsorship flyer that'll be available in the chat as well or on our website. And then really exciting news, if you all get our emails, you'll know that we shared the release of a new publication just this morning. And if you haven't seen it, you should go check it out. Our new report, Strengthening California's Climate Bond Outcomes with Water Data Infrastructure, outlines a framework for building trust through data governance, accessibility, and shared infrastructure for better Proposition 4 and beyond results. I hope you check it out. There's a link that you can go to. And then relatedly, our next virtual event is not a data for lunch, it's a town hall, a virtual town hall, obviously, on Wednesday, May 13th. And this special presentation and panel discussion will basically bring the report I just mentioned and the recommendations within it to life. So you'll be able to hear directly from the practitioners on the screen implementing data-focused strategies in real time, and also get a chance to ask your questions. So feel free to register when you get a moment. But again, that's May 13th. All right. And with all that in mind, I'm excited to welcome Ryo Takanashi to our Data for Lunch today. Ryo is the co-founder of WaterOne.ai, a platform dedicated to making groundwater governance more transparent and accessible across California's groundwater basins. He spent the first decade of his career managing agricultural supply chains as the youngest chief corn trader. What a cool title, by the way, at Japan's largest commercial importer, where he saw firsthand how water scarcity and weather volatility ripple through global food systems. Today, his focus is obviously ensuring people like you all are able to navigate California's groundwater future, from water managers to growers, so that we can all stay informed about decisions being made in the GSA boardrooms across the state. Awesome. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Rio.
Amazing. Perfect. Is the screen showing?
Yeah, it's we see your browser, Rio.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All good. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really excited today to be able to present and happy to get this started. So, just as the intro, I'm going to go right into it. We're WaterOne.ai, and what we do is we attend thousands of water agency board meetings and provide an AI-enabled database and analytics. And this is where our company is today. But really our focus and where we started, why all of the core components of our company is from the GSA database. And here we attend over 100 GSA board meetings every month and provide an AI-enabled database and analytics. So before we dive into what we're doing and what it looks like, I just want to do a quick introduction about myself and also how this project came to be. And oh, yes. And before that, this database, thank you for all of the support we have been getting from Fresno State Valley Ventures. We're based in Fresno right now, but also Imagine H2O, which is probably the best water accelerator in the world. And also, we are part of the Stanford Sustainability Accelerator as our project started at Stanford. So, as Alyssa explained for us, I was a corn trader before this and spent the first 10 years of my career importing up to 20% of Japan's corn imports. I was placed in Kansas and Minneapolis, and my job was basically to get corn to Japan, hell or high water, or US-China trade war or Ukraine war or COVID or any of these supply chain disruptions. And risk management was really the name of the game. But amongst all of that, I was more afraid of droughts. And as I continued on my career, I had that question of, okay, what does climate change really mean, weather changing mean for us and the food supply chain and its resilience? And Japan grows practically 0% of the corn that it imports. So I couldn't really answer that question and decided to go back to school to Stanford for the MBA and MS in sustainability to kind of explore that. And I met my co-founder there who was a CFO at a forestry company in Africa. And we met and we said, okay, both of us are really have questions about water. We really got to get together and make this happen. And we started out with research about adaptation and water in agriculture, kind of where those collide. But we went out into California knowing that learning about Sigma and just continued to interview growers because we felt coming from agriculture and forestry backgrounds, and then what was going on with Sigma, that a major component, the forefront, was going to be the growers, and it's not going to be an easy change for them. And actually, on the ground, a bulk of the on the ground changes are going to happen with them. And what we continued to hear was this Sigma nightmare that they described, and suddenly getting an invoice in their mailbox that is not of a small amount. And many of them are just surprised and don't know what Sigma is. And a lot of them are describing this as another full-time job, which they just cannot support. And telling us like these decisions happen in these GSA board meetings, and I know I should go to them, but spending 3 or 4 hours midweek, especially if you're in three GSAs, that's just really impossible for them to keep track of everything. And these GSA rules, I think it's the regulatory framework, as you all know, depends on these new local municipalities, the GSAs, and it's wonderful. It's democracy, but at the same time, it reflects how difficult managing water and adapting to climate is. In reality. So it's really local, the decisions, because the consequences, the water changes local, also very transient. So each decision is made every year, and it continues to be different every year as different weather conditions and what different water supply are available, and really complex to the point where it is so hard to kind of forecast out anything more than 2 weeks. And that makes it a more and more reactionary, meaning that you really need to be real time and adjusting on the fly. And that's where we came down and said, hey, this is something we could do. Attend GSA board meetings for these growers and basically create something that we can inform the growers with in terms of what is going on with your GSA, and being able to at least help them make the hard decisions they have to make. So I'm going to go straight into a demo here. You can visit this website, and you'll see almost the same thing. And if you hit subscribe on that button, you'll see the whole thing. But if you go to WaterOne.ai, this is the website we have. You can see that we now attend 100 plus board meetings that are happening throughout California, and couple of the meetings from 2 days ago are already here. And if you go into these, it will show you here are the top 3 key takeaways. We've kind of trialed and errored with a lot of growers, and this format of having 3 different topics for each board meeting was like easiest to consume for a lot of people. It looks like for this board meeting there was discussions of the GSA pullout and fee structure changes coming and things like this that are really crucial for a grower. And we have additional key takeaways, and then board actions of what was approved, how to engage with them, and if there were any firms and consultants mentioned in the meeting, that would be there as well. And of course, we have kind of this chat bot at the bottom, as with every other AI solution out there these days. But this has this chat bot basically has access to um, the meeting materials here. So if you ask something like, okay, there was a fee structure change. It's okay. What are the details of the fee structure change? It will go through the material and basically digest for you what the discussion was, so you can really dig into what you need to know without having the whole report be 10 pages long, just the three key takeaways, and then go into the detail like this. We also had a lot of growers and people on the road wanting to hear as a podcast. So
what
we
happens when a partner pulls out of a groundwater sustainability agreement and leaves everyone else holding the bill?
So this is something of a podcast that we have, and people like to listen to this in around 6 minutes for this 3 or 4 hour board meeting on the road, so they can just catch up on what's going on and be informed of maybe the three best key takeaways. And then going on into this agencies tab, this is all of the agencies that we cover for the CSA database, and you can see I have checks for every one of them, but each one of our subscribers are able to click this bell button to basically decide the ones that you want to hear about real time, and then you'll get an email that was sent out every time a meeting happens with the materials, and be able to catch up in that way. And if you click into any of these GSAs, it'll tell you kind of what is going on in terms of the sub-basin communication history with the state. Also, the main allocations updated every time there's an update in the board meeting. Some of the base rules for allocations, because we know that there's the base rules and the stuff that changes every year to year, and all of the meetings down below. And we've also put this really cool AI report creation as well. So if you click the summary report, it gets you from all of the meeting material, like an executive summary of where they are at as a GSA, kind of the main key takeaways of allocation ramp down, some basic compliance, and key recent developments. So we were going out there. We knew that real estate agents were paying like $1,000 and getting in 2 months a report like this, kind of informing them of water availability. But we really wanted to be inform as many people as possible of where they were at actually real time for cheaper prices. So there aren't any mistakes in terms of like not knowing that there was not going to be water available there and planning a bunch of orchards. If they had decision, they wouldn't have to have done so, and kind of strain themselves in the neck and be negative for the sub-basin as well. So it's a combination of those types of things, and this just gives it a much lower hurdle in that sense. I won't go into details of every feature that's here, but we kind of keep track of each sub-basin and kind of do our own risk scores. We have alerts. So every time someone is looking for RFP, RFQs, or any water transfer pricing, we can hit those up as well. And but one thing that we do want to show you is this chat GSA feature, pun intended, of course. But something that is as accessible as we would like to make it. And you can ask it any question, and this will have basically access to the whole database of the meetings that we have attended so far. So it'll have right now I'm asking it a question: which agencies has changed their allocations or fees this month, and it's going through this list of meetings right here, and you can see how many meetings we've covered. But this month, it'll go through here, the major GSAs that have changed their pricing. And as a grower, you can go through this list and say, hey, okay, it looks like these are the stuff that has changed. And maybe I need to check with my GSA, or okay, this is something I already knew about, and be able to, yeah, get on with your farming business as well. So that's the gist of our program. Kind of going back to my slides. But we really found focused on getting this information to the ground, to the growers. But we have come by and we've expanded our client base to water managers, investors, all want this type of information, and experts that's helping GSAs and GSAs themselves trying to look for, okay, what is everyone else doing, and what can we learn from it? And we've been really blessed to have a great set of experts helping us out and guiding us on where I wish we could have this and that. And for example, I think EKI, who's one of the most knowledgeable people in the Sigma space here, helping a lot of GSAs out, commented for us, EKI relies on us. Since the synthesize technical, detail-oriented, and often disjoint information into easily digestible content, which is exactly what we're striving to do. So we have a bunch of these, experts and large growers on our database, kind of searching through everything and utilizing our AI. But again, we really started with the mission of getting this out there to as many people as possible, and really keeping everyone up to date. So we have constantly been doing this weekly Sigma Intel email. This is free for you to subscribe to at WaterOne.ai again. Um, but it goes through, the must-knows of this week, and be able to kind of skim through what's been going on, and understand that as well. And also, we've recently started a Sigma Weekly podcast, which it tries to condense that information into 10 minutes a week, so you can listen and understand on the go, and yeah, be able to listen in. Again, both of these are completely free. So we trying to get to this information to as many people as possible. And I know there is kind of constraints in our ability to reach and maximizing people that we reach out to. So we partnered up with a bunch of firms that we know, and we met along the way as we interviewed so many people in the space. One of them is the Ag Center, thousands of people in their very famous email list, mainly growers in the Central Valley. And now we do kind of this bi-weekly email together about the changes that are going on in the Sigma world. Also, we partnered up with Water Rights, and we do articles with them, major things that are happening. Again, there's ads on it, but to the grower, this should be free for them to read. We also had the pleasure of working with some of the growers agencies, and two of them that we're right now working on to get some of this out to the public, if possible, with American pistachio growers in California, walnuts. They're both very concerned about the impact of Sigma on the growers and the people that they represent. And really wanted to do something that for the growers and it was a great way for us again to partner with them and be able to provide information real time, whether it's quarterly or monthly to their reader base. So all of that really exciting stuff where we're kind of going into these meetings and capturing their information and all the public information, but still making it easier to access. But now that we have this huge database of agency intel, and very happily, there are advancements in this AI space, especially around these language-based analysis out there that we can really utilize this type of database through a couple of the kind of AI agentic systems that we have been able to work with. And I'm going to shoot at you a couple of examples and happy to go into detail with any of these. But some things that we found we could do are kind of identifying trends within Sigma and what GSAs are doing. For example, there's a really big push you might know about well registrations throughout the valley. But we have found that there's this really interesting tendency that around 50 to 70%, there's like a plateau there of well registration and kind of you go into, hey, let's start doing a late fee or lockout from allocations. And maybe if we could dig further, there are some commonalities of what can be done with your plateauing there. That's some of the things that other agencies have done. And I'm really excited to see what type of consequences come from kind of the allocation lockout or late fee and effectiveness and be able to analyze stuff like this. Also, we've been working with a firm on price comparisons of water transfers. And since our the database is updating in real time or within a couple of days at least, this type of information around the pricing of traded water that are discussed in board meetings, we're able to use AI and large language models to pick those up and kind of do an analysis on them, which is something the real-time nature of this product really excels at. And this is another really interesting case that we've been working with like a chemical solution company. I think you've heard too much about golden mussels, and so have we, as we listen into so many of these board meetings discussing the craziness of the situation here. And as a chemical products company that we work with, really wanted to analyze the public information and what's being talked about across agencies and where people are at and where they can reach out to say, hey, we have a solution for this with this, and have you tried that? This might be a perfect fit, and stuff like this, and be updated real time in a dashboard. So we do things like spatial spread mapping, economic impact assessment, treatment efficiency comparison, and if there's like regulatory gaps. And if there was some confusion and like within the board of like, hey, I think this funding is there, or it's like, no, that's the funding is actually not the type of funding that you would imagine. You can't use it that way. Or for this chemical manufacturer, if there was talk about, hey, I don't think this is effective in this situation, a discussion going on in the board meeting, and they were able to say, hey, that's not actually true. It actually works in this type of conditions and stuff like that to be able to get the truth out and be able to work efficiently to tackle this type of moving, complex, multi-stakeholder problem. And then kind of going back into the beginning of the presentation, as we said, we're expanding out into um, water agencies, not just in California. So one of the research that we have been doing is the conversations that are going on with centers in across the U.S., kind of looking at what type of responses are there. We see kind of restrictive responses and adaptive responses. How many people are talking about it? Is there a surge in time? Stuff like this. This is something we could tell from this type of public information. So I think that's exactly about 20 minutes of my presentation. I'm really happy to go in and yeah, talk about each of the projects or any of the questions. But it would be awesome if you could type in WaterOne.ai into your search bar. It'll take you right to the page that I was showing you guys, and there will be a blue button that wasn't there because I'm logged in, but it says subscribe. It's completely free. You can get the weekly constantly, and then for 2 weeks, you can search through the whole database. And if there are anything about this presentation, hopefully it kind of got the creative child in you of like, hey, there's this new type of information database that we're creating, and then just the evolving capability by large language models to process this huge amount of text information and consume it and analyze it in a way that wasn't possible 3 years ago. So I'm really excited to talk to and discuss stuff with this crowd because I know that it would be super interesting to see all the application types that we could come up with for that. So yes, I'm very open to any questions.
Yeah, well, I saw a lot of questions come in the chat, Rio, so I think
Okay,
maybe I'll
perfect.
get us primed, but I think there was some overlap with kind of where I wanted to start the conversation anyway, but I think there's a lot of good thoughts coming from everyone. And clearly this is a really exciting topic to a lot of people right now. I think, you've talked about the metrics and the analysis capabilities that are made possible by kind of collecting and archiving all this information. Could you talk a little bit about WaterOne's process for verifying or kind of fact-checking data
Yeah.
displayed in the tool?
Yes. Yes, and this is the most common question we get, and we're perfectly transparent about this. So we do go through each one of these meetings, hand picking, hand reading them, and going through the material and checking by human. But AI and humans both make mistakes, especially as we're doing this in bulk for sure. And so we strive our best to get this real time, but we do make mistakes. And the great thing about having this community of weekly readers and a lot of the GMs, general managers of the GSAs are on this email list. So this Monday's weekly actually had a mistake. And the GM reached out three people in total by the 3 hours after the email was sent and let us know that it was wrong, and we sent out a correction right away. So it's more about having this community that understands there's mistakes that could be made, but we correct as much as possible, and we're blessed with that readership.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's important to kind of clarify because as these tools are improving, I think that's going to be an important component. And I do wonder, are there any instances of maybe growers or managers who have taken the information that you've collected to maybe flag questions with their board or introduce new discussions with local managers or consultants. I guess I'm wondering if you know of any kind of cases where this synthesis has been very helpful in kind of spurring discussions and questions in any specific GSAs.
Yeah, for sure. I think that is really the name of the game, especially for the smaller farmers. It's more about knowing that something is happening, and a lot of the people have told us like, oh my gosh, I'm just gonna go reach out to the rep in the GSA, my guy at the GSA, and ask about the details. So. Yeah, that definitely has been helping in terms of the engagement, and I think it's for us to kind of facilitate that type of discussion rather than just it's presenting everything as precise and correct, I guess.
Yeah. And maybe stepping back a bit, I see a few questions kind of related to this in the chat, so hoping to kind
Hmm.
of give the background to everyone. How do you approach, or does WaterOne approach getting GSAs, like, deciding which GSAs meetings you're attending, you know, how do you start collecting that information? Kind of what's the process for starting to track these meetings? How do you track which GSAs are already um, in the tool or add on to the tool, things like that?
Yeah, so we've been completely going off of which clients want us to attend. And we it's been a mixture of remote, and we do have a team on the ground as well to attend some of these in-person only meetings. So it completely depends on our capacity and the demand for those meetings. So if there's a big enough demand, we can send a person even if there are no remote ones. But we're always open to adding on any kind of remote meetings that we'd be able to attend. And if there are enough demand, we'll go out there and be able to send a person from our team.
And I guess maybe that leads to the in terms of operating cost question, how
Yeah.
does WaterOne fund your time and your staff's time, and how really what's the funding model? What's kind of available for free for users versus part of any paid plans?
Yeah, yeah. So like kind of the general information of the weekly, the podcast, being able to catch, some of the major changes that are going on in kind of the news tidbits. We have like kind of notifications. Those are free for everyone to be able to subscribe to. For the smallholder growers that we want to keep as low burden as possible, that's enough for them to kind of go and call the GSA if it's only one or two or three GSAs that they're managing. The large corporate ag enterprises, we found that might be in 10 GSAs. And if that's the case, they really want to utilize all our AI features and be able to keep track of all of the changes and be able to access stuff like this. That's where we kind of ask for a subscription price, as well as some of the GSAs that want access to research about other um, agencies, real estate, investment, and also like I was mentioned EKI, but be able consulting firms who are looking at helping out all these GSAs be able to know what's going on and be able to compare. For example, the allocations and how much they are across agencies quickly, and that kind of pays for justifying using a subscription like this.
Yeah, that's great. And I guess, a bigger picture question. I think AI is kind of changing the landscape for how a lot of people do work or track
Yeah.
things. And I'm wondering, I think you and Tomo had a very specific perspective that you all were coming from, but also he came from forestry. And so I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you have any kind of thoughts about how this tool or a tool like this could apply to other natural resource management areas, and if you've all thought about that.
Yeah. What do you have in mind for na other natural resources? And we're kind of super happy to expand to other places. Like we mentioned the data centers, or we're getting asked from regions in Texas who are exploring similar groundwater issues, and stuff like that. But is that kind of the things that
Yeah, and
you
I guess I meant kind of broadly, just in an imagination sort of capacity. Yes, are there other states that you've all considered expanding into? But then, are there other use cases besides groundwater that you
yeah.
think that this could be useful for?
At the end of the day, we're all about adaptation.
Mhm.
So I think the thing about adaptation that we noticed is it's very distributed. Mitigation, kind of counting CO2. Um, it's kind of more of a national level, right? Setting the
Mhm.
framework, and then carbon emitted in US might be very similar to carbon emitted in Africa. But at this, but the water problems in Salinas Valley are totally different with what is in Tule, for example,
Mhm.
and it's also very hard to forecast. So being able to keep track of all of everything that is going on, and be reactionary, really, to some of the changes that are going on. It might be very important when it's so hard to forecast more than 2 weeks out. So hopefully, like that golden muscle dashboard that
Yeah.
I touched upon. Being able to see where the situation is right now, what are the things that we could do, what's the discussion going on. There's so many stakeholders. That's kind of the risk management dashboard I would have loved to have
Mhm.
when I was a supply chain manager of trading corn into Japan. And yeah, I think there's a lot of things we could do and completely. And every time there's a new model drop for large language models, we're just super excited. Okay, let's apply it to a database. What's
Mhm.
something new that we could do? So
Got
there's
it.
probably definitely lots of things that I can't even imagine right
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's going to keep evolving. Well, I think, Elisa, since
now.
we have so much activity in the chat, maybe I'll start to turn it over to audience Q&A. So I think I tracked the first question from Lisa. Thanks so much for that thoughtful question, Lisa. So, I'm happy to kind of read your question out loud, but also invite you to share your thoughts if you're comfortable, Lisa. Um, I don't know if Lisa gave you the power
Oh
of
yeah.
speech.
Let me
Okay.
let me do that. Lisa Porter, right?
Yes.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rio. No, I think you summarized my question well. It is really interesting. Just yeah, fact checking, outreach, just not taking away from discussions. And I see what you were saying with the fact that this might actually spur people to have a conversation if they see something they don't like. So I hadn't thought of that. So yeah.
Hmm.
But yeah, the fact checking and making sure that there's not information in that might be draft or not correct or not yet vetted by the GSAs that could be a consideration. I know a lot of conversations go a certain direction, and I don't always know if AI is able to figure out, okay, this was just a thought. It wasn't really yet the final cost associated with something, or So I was wondering if you could talk more about that, about how it tracks kind of thinking and conversations that humans have versus, okay, these are results from something that came out of the discussion. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. So that is something that we've been working really, really hard on in terms of the basically the AI agent process that we have in there. The thing about the board meeting, the interesting thing is that it's super explicit the decisions that they're making. So it will go around the room, who makes a motion, who said aye, right? In that sense, it is a little bit easier than your regular kind of internal meeting of who said what and what was decided in that sense. We also have the agenda in minutes when available. So kind of supplementing that information there. But you're totally right. It's been a seesaw of us trying to get the train our AI models both for verifying, checking, and getting these things correctly as myself included of getting them correct, and then the understanding of the users here that they've used GPT and they know there's sometimes hallucination, though we have much less than because we go through so many checks, there's much less of that. Um, just the understanding that AI does make mistakes, and it's been a community effort again, and so blessed with that of like everybody kind of chiming in and saying, "Hey, that's not exactly what we discussed."
Thanks, Ryo. I think I might jump to a question that I had but didn't ask because I wanted to turn to audience questions. You have that risk indicator
Yeah.
next to GSAs. Could you talk a little bit about how that's calculated and kind of what goes into updating that on a regular basis?
Yeah, that's definitely. So the risk index is kind of to help understand the likelihood, we put it, of the regulations becoming stricter in that GSA. So we've had a lot of people say they understand the allocations now. There might not be allocations currently, but what's the likelihood that it might come up in the future? So through discussions with growers, we came up with like a rubric, basically, that looks at what the likelihood is and kind of helps in understanding that. And what we look at is actually the annual report from the GSAs and the reply from the DWR as it's public information. So since we are using LLMs, they understand very well the tone of the DWR review letter. And if it says, you're on track, that's great. Well, the score will be lower. If it says, you should there's action that needs to be taken, that becomes much higher. If there's fact checking, then it might be somewhere in the middle. And also kind of looking at the six people call them the six sins of Sigma, but the undesirable results, which basically are the things that trigger any new regulations. So how close are you to the thresholds that you've set? And yeah, and if we could sign an NDA, I'd be happy to show you the complete rubric. But it's been the score itself. We've discussed has been fun to look at and get a discussion going. But the real interesting information, I think, is kind of the I didn't go through it, but kind of the rundown of why the AI thought it was that score. And it will go through the rundown of like, okay, there are, half the wells are beyond threshold of the minimum threshold that they set. So that is really bad, but there's no seawater intrusion, worries. The DWR actually told them to take action on it. So that might raise the score. So the score is, relative, it's just the guidance, but being able to go through and read and say, "Oh, okay, that's what's going on with the each of the six undesirable results." I think that's where it's really interesting.
Thanks, Rio. Kind of going back and building on maybe questions about errors or limiting bias. How do you kind of ensure that the information being sent to growers is as accurate as possible? What's the process for correcting information if that's needed? And then also kind of building on that, I thought this was a great question is about how do you kind of test for recency bias in validating these summaries. I feel like some discussions at GSA board meetings or others are, proposed work or they're thinking through problems, but they haven't actually
Yeah.
implemented anything yet. So how do you make sure that that kind of stays front of mind for the folks reading these reports?
Yeah, for sure. I think that the large language models these days do a really good job of distinguishing, especially in board meeting where it's explicit, what are the kind of the discussions that are going on versus what are the actual board meeting decisions that are going on. We have a multiple person in a AI verification system where it's the first agent that comes up with the draft, and then it is reviewed, and then the team members of ours, humans, will go through and double check that, and then that is why it's like it takes us 2 or 3 days, or 1 or 2 or 3 days, to kind of get the reports out, not like 10 minutes. So I think that's the main of the flow. And again, to be if there's anything that we think is, you know, not explicitly said as a decision, we write that down as hey, this wasn't clear in the meeting notes as discussed.
Great. And I guess, kind of jumping around to different questions I'm seeing in the chat. One question is about kind of outputs from these transcripts. Obviously, the podcast is an output. Are you converting any of this to video, making it available on YouTube, or I think another use case might be, putting information in a tabular format. Is that possible, or kind of what are the outputs from these transcripts right now?
Yeah, and any of those are possible, and it just depends on how people want to consume this data. And very happy to do anything with them. The growers, I think, don't like dashboards as much as as much as we like to think they do. So we haven't gone of a tabular format too much, but this is the day and age of large language models where we can ask for a tabular format and get it out in 5 minutes, if it's a simple one. So anything possible. YouTube, we're thinking about it, and definitely if there's enough demand for it, we'd be happy to kind of get those out for sure.
Great. Maybe before I kind of jump to some more conversational questions again, could you talk a little bit about the process for developing the graphs and the kind of financial analysis component? Is that something that the AI does, or that your staff are doing, or how is that developed?
A combination for sure. So we might have it search for, explicit decisions made in the board meeting of, for example, golden mussels. I think that was one of the things that popped up of, actual decisions made in allocating budget to fight the mussel spread. And if we go through each one of them and double check that if they're correct, we might be able to, create a graph from it. And maybe along all of this, there's probably going to be help from AI in terms of maybe making the graph look nicer or stuff like that. But still, it's basically the similar process as a human would do.
And then kind of going back to the AI model itself, how much of this platform is really learning from
Mhm.
GSA board meetings and the discussions being tracked versus actual GSPs, plan updates, annual reports, and implementations? And I think this kind of ties in to Lisa's question about, how are fact checkers kind of ensuring that they're trained in Sigma E's or the language of the day, to make sure that these things are accurate.
Yeah, I think that was our main job, to be honest, of making sure that we create an AI that's capable of understanding all this. And it just was a series of the trial and error. Okay, we need to have it learn this kind of information. Let's have this type of text in the context window, the prompting, you know. The podcast, it was really first hard to have it pronounced Tulare. So stuff like that where we're constantly feeding in information about Sigma and what's going on into this model. So it understands and it has the proper background to be able to understand what's going on. And yeah, and I think yep, going trial and error, trial and error, trial and error until we were at the point it's like, okay, this understands Sigma pretty well.
And are you tracking kind of the sources in real time then and reflecting that in the tool to make
Yes.
sure, okay, cool. Um, One question we got was about kind of the state levels engagement. Have
Mhm.
they kind of reached out, or been using this tool at all, or kind of interested in the tool? And maybe if not, how do you see this tool being helpful to state staff?
Yeah, so we do have a lot of state domains and email list in our email list. So I think there's a bunch of people listening in to our weeklies, and I've heard stories about, hey, I wish we could go into these board meetings more without freaking people out and just understand that what is happening. So I think it would be super helpful in that sense, and we're happy to do an analysis and kind of aggregate that in understanding. I really think that if I know there's good communication going on between DWR and or State Resources Control Board with the GSAs and what they need, but I think it could be something that could make that process more seamless. Of hey, there's like conversations that are going on. They're having trouble with well registration at a certain point, and this is something that is a problem that is not one GSA, even if it's if they're talking about it in just one DSA, but seen throughout the valley. That is something you can quickly recognize in those dashboards and stuff. So I think that's definitely something that I think we could help with, and would be happy to kind of start the conversation.
Great. One kind of maybe more few couple of technical questions before I kind of jump around again. One was, can you kind of talk about how you created the prompt to start describing these meetings, kind of what went into that? And then a very technical question that, please forgive me if I'm not articulating this well, is what LLM-based model is this? And is this cloud hosted with RAG? I don't know if I did that right.
Yeah. Of course, of course. Yes. So to answer, what was the first question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just if you could talk a little bit about the process for how you created the prompt to begin summarizing these meetings and what went into that.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a different prompt for, the meeting recaps. There's a prompt for podcasts. There's a prompt for our weekly. So the underlying database is just basically the meeting transcripts. And so we've been constantly changing for whatever the necessary use is. I think the three must knows or three key takeaways for was really came from a need. And we've been just showing lots of growers and stakeholders, and this is what stuck. Is basically how the prompting happened, and then in terms of the format. But other than that, it's just constantly feeding context into the prompt and into the model to be able to understand things correctly. And yeah, again, a lot of trial and error that we went through. And then, yeah, so I won't go into too much detail in terms of how the model works, but yeah, we're only using US models if we get that question a lot. And then, and basically, yeah, using RAG as well as in the process.
Got it. And then, you've talked a little bit about how these summaries are developed, but could you provide some examples of the additional context that your staff might provide upon reviewing these transcripts, or developing these summaries before they go out?
Yeah, yeah. So some of the stuff that goes in there are like information from the website of the GSAs, the public documents that they host, overall understanding about Sigma, the main key terms and how that relates. Very, very similar, I think, to if you were to have a new employee in your firm that tries to understand this process, you would give that person what you would give it the AI in terms of like, hey, let's catch you up on there's this thing called Sigma in California. This is what you need to know.
Great. And then I'll just ask this kind of final question, then open it up to the group again. Thanks so much for all the deluge of questions in the chat, everyone. Hopefully I've been recapping them okay. You talked a little bit about the applicability of this tool in other places or, other contexts and things like that. Are you already implementing this tool in other states? How hard would that be since they would have a different legislative framework around water and, meetings and policy developments? Have you tried that anywhere else?
Yes, we are expanded into 50 states right now.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, maybe Elisa, I'll turn it back to you to see if there's any additional questions from the crew.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say I think it's very courageous to like build something in public and be getting feedback in real time from folks. So, like you said, having a really engaging like membership base is great. I do want to invite anyone who's on the call to raise their hand if they'd like to come off mute or come off camera and discuss anything with Ryo and Hannah.
Yeah.
Feel free to raise your hand or chat.
Yeah, and I just want to mention, like, thank all of the general managers of these GSAs who are a lot of them receiving our emails and kind of giving us feedback on the material. Um, they're super mission driven to reach out to and reach as many growers as possible. And yeah, I think it's their passion that makes this type of thing possible.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, so any other questions from anyone in the chat, or raise your hand or email us after? That's okay too. Ryo's been great about answering my questions that I had for this call too. So thanks, Ryo.
Yeah, no worries. And I guess like um the references to information that used, I think we mark everything, and as I explained to the reader, happy to kind of go through, rubrics and stuff as well. You can also ask the chatbot. It's like, okay, where did you get this information? And
Yeah.
it'll go through and say, hey, this is where this is what was actually said. This was what was actually written, and you can go here. And yeah, that kind of communication really helps kind of understand. Okay, this is maybe I understood it a little bit different than what it's saying and stuff like that. So
Yeah. I got a couple of questions while you were giving
sure.
that great answer, Rio. One was just, Sky flagged that it would be great to hear about, any cases where you've been surprised how it's been received or used by growers, managers, anyone, any kind of surprising use cases you've run into.
Surprising use cases. Yeah, we had a lot of academic people kind of again trying to figure out, what was going on with Sigma on the ground. Definitely a tool that can be used there. It was like, oh, okay, actually there's some research that could be done here. Um, Definitely, I was surprised at growers who have like 20 GSAs in irrigation districts that they have to kind of keep track of. That was something that was like, oh my gosh, how can we help? Types of situation and stuff like that. Well, the golden mussel thing was a super surprise for us. We never intended to do that in the first place when we started, but just a topic that kept coming up, and it meant people of yeah that needed this information. So
That's great. And then Bram asked, I think you talked a little bit about this, but are you ever providing these summaries to managers for free after their meetings since, they are kind of working with you to provide input, or how has that relationship worked so far?
yeah, yeah. We have been providing, parts of our services for free, and then it depends on what the deal we have with the GMs for sure. And happy to talk through and see what we can do. If there's like custom reports that we're doing, it's really hard for us to be able to do that kind of completely for free.
Yeah,
But yeah. My respect and it completely goes out to the GSAs and their general managers. So if anybody has questions about that, please feel free to reach out. We can always find a way. We can do this.
that's great. Um, yeah, and then maybe if there's any other questions, please let me know. But we got one final question from Elizabeth, just regarding kind of transparency behind closed door conversations rather than, public debate on things. And so curious if you have a take on how you think tools like this might support public conversation and public transparency.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love this kind of the systemic thinking that's going
Yeah,
on.
yeah,
I've had a lot of conversations with the GMs around this, and it's like this isn't, we know it's public, and it's a added, I guess, like responsibility. Um, but still, I think public comments and stuff raise really difficult questions there. And those types of things are still there. And I feel like, for the bigger agencies like for example the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, they're on a platform where they stream on their website all of the discussions that's going on. I still think those are super lively, and they have so many people watching them as well. So, of course, there's going to be, let's not talk about this or that, but yeah, in the long term, but we're still seeing a lot of important discussions that are going on, and yeah, I just feel that this type of information, if it can get to more and more people, it would be beneficial for the world.
Thanks, Rio. Any other thoughts, questions? I want to invite people, Lisa, Elizabeth really appreciated that final question. So please feel free to come off mute. Anyone who wants to add to the conversation.
I want to add to that. I
Yeah,
think
go for it.
Aaron Fukuda, I think, comes up in all these meetings with you guys as well. He had the same comment about transparency, and that might we're not going to talk about stuff in board
Mhm.
meetings. And I just feel like that is so total BS on Aaron's front, because he's the one who's talking about everything in front of everyone in the board meeting with total transparency. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, there's gonna be some parts of it that's like, or I feel like there's already parts of it. It's like the very close session, and that might be, negotiations with neighboring GSAs, for example.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of people who want to get information out there and be transparent about the discussions that are going on.
Mhm.
And I think I just admire all the GSA managers for understanding, like, it's better to be transparent in how what they're doing, rather
Mhm.
than kind of trying to hide stuff, which uh, doesn't work out at the end. Is I think the learning for a lot of people.
Yeah. I have Lisa and then maybe Rachel. Lisa, if you can take Lisa off mute.
Yeah, sorry, one
Yeah,
second.
thanks.
Oh, there you go.
I was just gonna, for the conversation, to say, like, I don't think there's a problem with transparency per se, but I think the challenge is, how do you I think that what maybe GSAs or others are struggling with is maybe the misinterpretation, right? It's still, AI is still new to a lot of people. And so how are you confident and trust, and I'm not saying you, I, whatever, the public, that the information there is actually what was intended in the
Mhm.
conversation. I think that is the struggle. And I see that you're aware and trying to probably, yeah, refine it as you go. But I think that is really the challenge here, is how do you ensure the messaging? Sigma is very, very nuanced. It's not black and white at all. And so how is that messaging translated in some of your materials, with graphs, etc., where it can go beyond what the GSA's intended, right, to bring to the public? So I think that might be the main challenge.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that is so totally true. And that's why we try to communicate with the general managers as much as possible, um, and kind of get a constant communication going, where um, we can be more helpful. And there's a couple things in the pipeline that I would love to discuss, but maybe next time around, building tools for those GMs, and being able for them to utilize in ways that they can't right now. And yeah, hopefully those types of things are in the pipeline as well. So wishing that we can make a, yeah, a news later in the year.
Thanks, Rio. I think we'll go to Rachel. Lisa? Maybe
Yep.
I'm saying your name right.
Hi.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, this was just absolutely fascinating. Thank you for hosting, and thank you, Rio, for presenting and for putting this together. So I have recently been working on developing some AI meeting minutes. I wasn't aware of this effort, but on California Water Commission meetings. And what we found was that sometimes the AI tool would create some analyses, like AI
Uh,
analyses, we weren't expecting, like
Hmm.
analyzing people's um, biases or people's tendencies to lean one way or the other on different topics. And we've wrestled with that in our meeting summaries. And I was just curious, sort of, if you did some similar wrestling, if that came up, when you're using the AI tool, we found that sometimes it took some liberty and added in some analytics that it was generated based on the prompt that we were providing.
Yeah.
And it sort of like the folks who really know the material well said in the moment, like when they were
Mhm.
attending these meetings, that sort of analytics would have been the type of thing the conversations they would have been having in back rooms, and it would have been really interesting to have. But it raised some questions about, like, do you want that type of information more easily accessible? And I'm just curious how you wrestled with that particular topic.
Yeah. So I think our endeavor has always been kind of trying to stick to the facts that were spoken and the analytics. Of course, we have a chat bot, so you can ask for opinion as a user. But anything we generate, basically, um, we try to stick to the facts as possible.
Perfect.
If there if there ever could be. And I feel like you know, oh, some people ask us, is this like kind of end of journalism? And it's like, no, that is not what we're trying to do. I know, we work with water rights, and we look up to people like SGV Water, and kind of sometimes showing views of like people need to know about this and standing up for the public in some views. That is, I think, super important, but not exactly our mission in what AI is really good at. So we're completely getting all of the AI agents in the process really to focus on the facts and verify each line that it can be attributed to something. And that's basically what we try to do.
Awesome. That's super. Did you compare different AI models in how they would respond to the transcripts? Okay, and then you were like
Yeah.
sort of comparing those, and then do you
Comparing and then combining.
do you combine models, or you change models, or
Yeah, we have it goes through a bunch of different models to be, first come up with this model is good at first coming up with the, concise takeaways without hallucinating. This is better in kind of checking line by line that there is actually something said about each one of the parts of the report to be, attributed to, and then yeah, stuff like that. So.
amazing, amazing. This is such inspirational work. So I'll reach out to you, and yeah, I'd love to explore opportunities to collaborate.
Perfect.
Thanks,
That would
Rachel.
sound great.
This was great. Thanks for hosting.
Yeah. Well, Elisa, I'm not seeing any other folks raising their hands, but want to give one more opportunity in case there's any kind of burning questions. But I also think that's a great note to end on. And you got some compliments from Lauren Steely in the chat from Matt there too, Rio. So
Oh, really?
yeah, yeah.
That's great. Look up to Mid as well, and
Well,
their
yeah,
transparency ahead of everyone else. I feel like, and their
yeah, yeah. You got one final question from Jack in the chat, Rio. I'm not sure if you can see that, and maybe we'll end with that one.
those things. Uh, yeah. So the question is, integrating NASA's GRACE and um, remote sensing satellite imagery to flagging non-compliant GSAs in real time. Yeah. Definitely. So we are super focused on having large language models and kind of dealing with language data. But we know that there is a whole nother side of AI, which is more advanced in the science community of predictive analytics and stuff. So there's definitely probably combination of, more language and spoken data in meetings with actual numerical data and predictive data that the some of these AI models can use, and kind of getting a whole picture of what's going on. So definitely somewhere that these types of knowledge can be combined.
Great. Well, Elisa, maybe I'll turn it over to you to close, but thank you all for sticking with us for so long. And thank you, Ryo, so much again for being patient with all of our questions. I
No,
think
thank
you're
you.
kind of getting the brunt of everyone's interest and enthusiasm for this topic right now. And so it's just really, really great that you were able to join us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you so
no,
much for your time.
thank you so to everyone as well. It's like I know that AI is just still an evolving technology, and we're trying our best, but there's definitely things that we want to work on more. And this type of feedback really helps us, not get too locked away in our code and and
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, and hopefully a lot of great opportunities for partnerships coming out of this call. I feel like you just made a lot of friends and new colleagues. So hopefully that's
I'm super excited to
yeah,
explore
yeah.
database and technology and your
Yeah,
guys' input. I think we could do a lot. So
yeah. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Again, thank you, Rio. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you to all the question askers and folks who dropped things in the chat. Don't forget to fill out your survey once we close out the session, but look forward to seeing you all in May for that town hall event. And please take a look at that report that we published this morning, and reach out with any questions. Thanks
Thank you,
again.
Rio. Thank you, everyone.